The scent of baked macaroni and cheese, deeply savory with sharp cheddar and a hint of smoked paprika, used to be the official smell of Sunday afternoons in the Montgomery household. For 35 years, Megan had stood at this exact kitchen counter, her hands dusted with flour, humming old gospel tunes while her late husband, Robert, sneaked pieces of crispy skin from the fried chicken resting on the wire rack. This kitchen was her sanctuary. It was the heart of the home she and Robert had purchased in the suburbs of Atlanta, back when they barely had 2 dimes to rub together. But today, the kitchen didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a film set. "Okay, guys, so I'm literally obsessed with this new organic matcha blend," Chloe's voice rang out, sharp and artificially bright, cutting through the comforting sound of oil sizzling in Megan's cast iron skillet. Megan paused, her wooden spoon hovering over a pot of collard greens. She glanced over her shoulder. Her daughter-in-law, Chloe, was standing by the marble island, the island Megan had saved up for 3 years to install, adjusting a blindingly bright LED ring light. Chloe was 31, beautiful in a manufactured way, with flawless makeup, expensive hair extensions, and a tight beige loungewear set that cost more than Megan's first car. She was speaking into her iPhone, posing with a cup of green liquid she had no intention of drinking. "It's all about protecting your peace and establishing boundaries, you know?" Chloe continued to her phone, tossing her hair. "Self-care Sunday is mandatory in this house." Megan let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh and turned back to the stove. "Protecting your peace," she thought, shaking her head. It was a funny phrase coming from a woman who hadn't washed a single dish in the 3 years she had lived under this roof. "Grandma, look!" The heavy atmosphere broke as 8-year-old Maya and 5-year-old Leo ran into the kitchen, their faces lit up with pure joy. Leo was clutching a slightly battered drawing of what looked like a purple dog, and Maya had flour on her nose from helping Megan earlier that morning. Megan's face instantly softened. The weariness that settled in her bones from a long life of nursing double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital vanished. She wiped her hands on her apron and knelt down, pulling them both into a warm embrace. "Well, Lord have mercy, who drew this masterpiece?" Megan asked, her voice rich and melodic, wrapping around the children like a warm blanket. "Is that a purple hound dog, Leo?" "It's a space dog, Grandma," Leo beamed proudly. "A space dog? Well, it needs to go right on the refrigerator," Megan said, standing up and grabbing a magnet. "Maya, Leo, please," Chloe snapped, dropping her influencer persona in an instant. The phone went down, and her face tightened in annoyance. "Don't run in the kitchen, and don't touch my ring light, Maya. I need the aesthetic to be clean. Plus, you're getting Grandma's cooking smells all over your clothes. Go upstairs and play on your iPads." "But Mom, Grandma said we could help make the biscuits," Maya started, her shoulders slumping. "I said go upstairs," Chloe ordered, her voice cold. The children looked at Megan, their big eyes seeking intervention. Megan forced a gentle, reassuring smile, though her chest tightened with a familiar dull ache. "Go on, babies. Grandma will bring you some warm biscuits in a little bit, okay?" Once the children were gone, silence fell over the kitchen, save for the simmering greens. Chloe picked up her phone, completely ignoring the tension, and began furiously tapping out a text message. "Chloe, sweetheart," Megan said gently, trying to keep the peace. "You know they just want to spend some time together. Family dinners used to be—" "Megan, please," Chloe interrupted, not even looking up from her screen. She was the only daughter-in-law Megan knew who refused to call her mother-in-law Mom, or even Miss Megan. "I'm curating a brand here. I can't have flour and grease ruining the background. Besides, Jamal is bringing a potential brand sponsor over for dinner next week, and I need the house looking modern, not like a 1990s soul food diner." Megan bit the inside of her cheek. A 1990s soul food diner. She looked at the oak cabinets Robert had sanded and varnished with his own hands. She looked at the floral curtains she had sewn herself. This house was paid for by blood, sweat, and 35 years of emptying bedpans, holding the hands of dying patients, and working holiday shifts. When Robert passed away suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago, Megan's world had shattered. It was Jamal, her only son, who had convinced her to let him and his new wife move in. "It makes sense, Mom," Jamal had said, holding her hands, his eyes full of the same earnest love his father had possessed. "The house is too big for you to maintain alone. We'll take care of you. We'll be a real family under one roof." Megan had agreed. She had wanted to help her boy. She had sold her husband's beloved vintage truck, dipped into her savings, and paid off Jamal's lingering college debts so he could start his logistics business with a clean slate. She thought she was building a generational foundation. She didn't realize she was handing over the keys to her own prison. The heavy oak front door clicked open, followed by the sound of a briefcase dropping onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. "Jamal?" Megan called out, her maternal instincts instantly kicking in. Jamal walked into the kitchen, and Megan's heart physically ached at the sight of him. At 34, her son looked like a man a decade older. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie was loosened, and deep, dark circles carved hollows under his eyes. He looked depleted, completely and utterly drained. "Hey, Mama," Jamal muttered, kissing her cheek. He smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. "Rough day at the warehouse, baby?" Megan asked, turning down the heat on the stove and reaching for a clean mug to pour him some sweet tea. "You look exhausted. Sit down. Let Mama get you a plate." Before Jamal could answer, Chloe stepped forward, her face lighting up with a sudden, overwhelming enthusiasm that gave Megan whiplash. "Babe, you're finally home!" Chloe wrapped her arms around Jamal's neck, kissing him emphatically. "Listen, I just found the perfect interior designer for the living room remodel. She can do that minimalist monochromatic look I was showing you on Pinterest. It's only going to run us about $15,000 if we act now." Jamal flinched. It was a micro-expression, but Megan saw it. She had been a nurse for nearly 4 decades. She knew how to read the vital signs of a human body in distress. Jamal was drowning. "Chloe, babe." Jamal rubbed his temples, his voice thin and raspy. "Can we talk about this later? One of my biggest vendor contracts just fell through today. The logistics business. It's bleeding right now. I don't think we have 15 grand for a remodel." Chloe's smile vanished, replaced by a sharp, brittle frown. "Jamal, we talked about this. We have to maintain an image. If you want to attract high-tier clients, you can't have them coming into a house that looks like it belongs to a retiree. You have to spend money to make money." "Did you even look at the HELOC rates like I asked?" "I'm looking into it," Jamal deflected, avoiding his mother's eyes. "Just, let's eat first. Please." Dinner was a quiet, suffocating affair. The dining room table, a beautiful mahogany piece that Robert had bought for their 10th anniversary, felt as expansive and cold as an iceberg. Megan sat at one end, Jamal at the other, with Chloe in the middle. The children were eating in the kitchen, a new rule Chloe had instituted because she claimed Maya chewed too loudly and ruined the dining ambiance. Megan watched her son push his food around his plate. The fried chicken she had spent hours preparing remained largely untouched. "So," Chloe said, cutting through the heavy silence, her voice dripping with casual conversational tone that immediately put Megan on high alert. "I was thinking about the spatial flow of the house today." Jamal didn't look up. "Spatial flow?" "Yes. Maya is getting older, and Leo is starting to need his own space to play. The house is just feeling really cramped lately." Chloe took a delicate sip of her sparkling water. "And with your mother's room taking up the entire master suite on the first floor, it really limits what we can do with the floor plan." Megan froze. The fork in her hand hovered in midair. The master suite on the first floor was her room. It was the room she had shared with Robert for 30 years. "Chloe," Jamal warned softly, shooting a nervous glance at his mother. "Not now." "No, Jamal, we need to have adult conversations," Chloe pressed, reaching into the pocket of her expensive cardigan. She pulled out a glossy trifold brochure and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Megan's plate. Megan looked down. The brochure featured a stock photo of a smiling, silver-haired woman sitting in a wheelchair, holding hands with a young nurse in scrubs. Bold, cheerful letters across the top read, "Sunset Meadows Assisted Living, affordable care for your loved ones." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop. "What is this?" Megan asked. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, smooth, and unreadable as deep water. "It's an option," Chloe said smoothly, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the table. "A really good option, actually. It's a state-subsidized facility just 3 towns over. They have bingo nights, water aerobics. People your own age, Megan. You wouldn't be so lonely. And it would free up the master bedroom so we could turn it into a proper playroom for the kids, and maybe a small studio for my content creation." Megan didn't look at Chloe. She slowly raised her eyes to look at her son, her flesh and blood. The boy she had carried for 9 months, the boy whose scraped knees she had bandaged, the man whose debts she had paid off with her husband's life insurance. "Jamal," Megan Saz said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel, "are you sitting at this table, eating the food I cooked, in the house your father built, and telling me you are putting me in a nursing home?" Jamal looked physically ill. He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at his half-eaten chicken. "Mom, it's not like that. It's just, things are really tight. Chloe is stressed. The kids are growing. We're just looking at all the avenues." "Avenues?" Megan repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I am 64 years old. I am in perfect health. I cook, I clean, I raise your children while your wife takes pictures of herself all day. And you want to put me in a state-run facility?" "Oh, please, stop playing the victim," Chloe suddenly snapped, slamming her hands on the table. The facade of the polite daughter-in-law completely evaporated, revealing the vicious entitlement underneath. "You are not in perfect health, Megan, and we are tired of pretending you are." Megan's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What in God's name are you talking about?" Chloe stood up, marching over to the sideboard and grabbing a manila folder. She threw it onto the table next to the brochure. "Show her, Jamal. Show her what Dr. Evans sent us." Jamal closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Mom, please, we didn't want to do it this way." "Do what, Jamal? Speak to me like a man," Megan demanded, her heart beginning to pound a heavy, warning rhythm against her ribs. Jamal reached out with trembling hands and opened the folder. "Chloe noticed things, Mom. Little things. You leaving the stove on. You forgetting where you put your keys. Repeating stories. She was worried, so she spoke to a specialist at the clinic downtown. They reviewed your recent checkup history." Jamal pushed a piece of paper toward her. It was a medical letterhead. As a nurse of 35 years, Megan's eyes instantly scanned the document, bypassing the medical jargon straight to the diagnostic impression. Patient exhibits classic markers of early-onset dementia. Immediate intervention and supervised living arrangements are highly recommended to prevent danger to minors in the home. Megan felt the air get sucked out of the room. The room spun for a fraction of a second. "Early-onset dementia?" Megan whispered. She looked at the signature. Dr. Richard Evans, a private concierge doctor known in the city for writing whatever prescriptions his wealthy clients paid him to write. She had never met this man in her life. Her own primary care physician was Dr. Gable, whom she had seen just 2 months ago and who had told her she had the heart and mind of a woman 20 years younger. "You're forgetting things, Mom," Jamal pleaded, his voice cracking. "Last week you left the front door wide open. Leo could have wandered out into the street." Chloe had to catch him. "You're becoming a danger to the kids." "I never left that door open," Megan said, her voice rising, a terrifying realization dawning on her. She looked at Chloe. Chloe was looking back at her, her eyes cold, calculating, and entirely victorious. It was a setup. The stove left on, the keys gone missing, the open door. Chloe had been orchestrating this for months, gaslighting her, setting the stage. And now this fake medical evaluation, likely bought and paid for, was the final nail in the coffin. "Denial is the first symptom," Chloe said smoothly, looking at Jamal with fake sympathy. "See, babe? The doctor warned us she would react this way. She doesn't even know she's losing her mind. It's not her fault, but we have to prioritize the safety of our children." Megan stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She looked at her son. She didn't look at him with anger, but with a profound, earth-shattering grief. "Jamal," Megan said, her voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane raging in her chest. "Look at me. Look into your mother's eyes." Jamal slowly raised his head. Tears were brimming in his eyes, but they were tears of cowardice, not conviction. "Do you truly believe this?" Megan asked softly. "Do you truly believe that my mind is going? Or are you just so terrified of this woman that you are willing to let her throw your own mother onto the street so she can have a bigger closet?" "Don't speak to my wife that way!" Jamal flared up, a sudden burst of defensive anger masking his intense guilt. "She is trying to protect this family. We are drowning, Mom. I am drowning. We need this house. We need the space, and I cannot be taking care of a sick mother on top of a failing business and 2 kids." The echo of his shout rang through the dining room. "I cannot be taking care of a sick mother." The words hung in the air, sharp and jagged, severing the invisible cord that tied them together. In that moment, Megan didn't see the boy she had raised. She saw a weak, spineless stranger who had allowed himself to be hollowed out and filled with the venom of a manipulative woman. Chloe stood tall, a smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly lined lips. "The facility is expecting you on Monday, Megan. We'll help you pack." Megan looked at the fake medical file. She looked at the brochure. Then she looked at the two of them. A lifetime of nursing had taught Megan one critical lesson. When a patient is coding, panicking gets you nowhere. You have to be cold. You have to be precise. She did not cry. She refused to give Chloe the satisfaction of a single tear. She straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full height. She was a black woman who had survived segregation, 35 years in trauma wards, and the death of the love of her life. She was not going to be broken by a plastic influencer and a cowardly son. "You don't need to help me pack," Megan said, her voice dripping with an icy, regal authority that made Jamal physically take a step back. "And I will not be going to any facility on Monday." "Mom, you don't have a choice," Jamal started. "I said," Megan cut him off, her tone like a whip cracking in the silent room. "I will not be going. If I am no longer welcome in my own home, I will leave. Tonight." Chloe crossed her arms, feigning concern, but her eyes danced with triumph. "Where are you going to go, Megan? You don't have anywhere else." Megan ignored her completely. She looked only at Jamal. "I hope, Jamal, that when you are my age, your children show you the exact same grace and mercy you have shown me tonight. God is watching, and he does not sleep." Without another word, Megan turned her back on them and walked out of the dining room. Her steps were measured, unhurried, and dignified. She walked into the master suite, the room she had shared with Robert, and quietly closed the door. She didn't turn on the main light, only the small brass lamp on the nightstand. She pulled her old, sturdy leather suitcase from the top of the closet. Neatly, methodically, she began to fold her clothes. Her Sunday church dresses. Her comfortable scrubs she kept for gardening. The quilt Robert's mother had knitted for their wedding. With every fold, she locked away a piece of her grief, transforming her sorrow into a cold, hardened resolve. When the suitcase was full, she snapped the brass locks shut. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She walked over to her nightstand, picked up her reading glasses, and pulled out her smartphone. She opened her contacts, scrolling past her son's name, her thumb hovering over a number she hadn't called in almost a year. Marcus Hughes, attorney at law. Robert's oldest friend from their Army days, a man who had marched in Selma and fought in courtrooms for decades. A man who knew the Montgomery family secrets better than Jamal did. Megan pressed call. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Megan? Well, this is a surprise. How are you, my dear?" "Marcus," Megan said, her voice steady, though her knuckles were white from gripping the phone so hard. "I need you to come pick me up, and I need you to bring Robert's file." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The casual warmth in Marcus's voice vanished, replaced instantly by the sharp, calculating tone of a seasoned lawyer preparing for battle. "Are you safe, Megan?" "For now," she replied, staring out the window at the dark street. "But Jamal and Chloe just tried to throw me into a state facility. They claim I'm losing my mind. They're trying to take the house." A heavy, dangerous silence emanated from the speaker. When Marcus spoke again, it sent a shiver of pure anticipation down Megan's spine. "They clearly don't know who they're dealing with," Marcus said softly. "And they clearly don't know what Robert left in that vault. Pack your bags, Megan. I'll be there in 30 minutes in the Cadillac. It's time we showed your daughter-in-law how a real eviction works." Megan hung up the phone. She looked at her reflection in the dark window pane. The woman looking back at her was not a victim. She was a survivor. And she was about to teach her son and his wife a lesson they would never, ever forget. The 30 minutes it took for Marcus to arrive felt like a strange, suspended reality. Megan sat perfectly still on the edge of the velvet armchair in the entryway, her posture impeccably straight, her hands resting calmly on the handle of her vintage leather suitcase. She did not weep. She did not pace. She simply waited, a queen observing the crumbling of her own court. From the living room, the muted sounds of the television played, deliberately turned up to drown out the suffocating silence. Jamal was hiding in there, staring blankly at a sports channel, nursing a glass of bourbon. He couldn't bring himself to look at the entryway. Chloe, however, was unable to mask her nervous energy. She kept pacing between the kitchen and the hallway, stealing sideways glances at Megan, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Chloe had expected a breakdown. She had expected begging, tears, maybe even a screaming match that she could secretly record to further prove Megan's instability. This chilling, stony silence unnerved her. Finally, the heavy sweep of headlights cut through the darkness of the front windows, casting long, dramatic shadows across the hardwood floor. The low, unmistakable hum of a well-maintained V8 engine rumbled into the driveway. Megan stood up. The brass clasps of her suitcase clinked softly in the quiet house. "Is your little Uber here?" Chloe asked, crossing her arms and leaning against the doorframe, trying to regain her air of superiority. "Make sure they have the right address for the shelter. Or are you going to a cheap motel?" Megan didn't dignify the taunt with a response. She opened the heavy oak front door. Parked in the driveway was not an Uber, but a pristine midnight blue 1988 Cadillac Brougham. It was a car that commanded absolute respect, a relic of an era when things were built to last. The driver's side door opened and Marcus Hughes stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. Marcus was a man who carried his 70 years like a badge of honor. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him immaculately, he possessed the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that only came from decades of battling in courtrooms. He walked with a cane, a silver-handled piece of carved mahogany, but he used it more as an accessory of power than a crutch. Hearing the heavy thud of the car door, Jamal finally emerged from the living room. When he saw the man walking up the driveway, the blood completely drained from his face. "Mr. Hughes?" Jamal choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus didn't look at Jamal. He didn't look at Chloe, whose arrogant smirk had instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp confusion. Marcus walked directly to Megan. His stern, weathered face softened just a fraction as he looked at the woman who had been like a sister to him for over 40 years. "Evening, Megan," Marcus said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the space. "You ready?" "I am, Marcus," Megan replied softly. Marcus reached out and took the heavy leather suitcase from her hand as if it weighed nothing. Only then did he turn his gaze to the two younger people standing in the doorway. He looked at Chloe first. His eyes, sharp and analytical behind his wire-rimmed glasses, swept over her from head to toe. It was a deeply clinical look, the kind of look a seasoned exterminator gives a termite. Chloe instinctively took a step back, her arms falling to her sides. Then Marcus looked at Jamal. The disappointment in the older man's eyes was so profound, so absolute, that Jamal physically recoiled. "Your father," Marcus said, the words cutting through the night air like a surgical scalpel, "was a man who knew the value of loyalty. He built this foundation with calloused hands and an honorable heart. It is a profound tragedy to see what his legacy has been reduced to tonight." "Mr. Hughes, you don't understand," Jamal stammered, his hands shaking slightly. "It's for her own good. She's sick. We have a doctor's—" "Save your breath, son," Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. "A court of law is where we discuss evidence. And trust me, we will be discussing it very soon." Chloe's eyes widened. "Court? What are you talking about? This is a private family matter." Marcus finally addressed her directly, a cold, polite smile touching the corners of his mouth. "There is no such thing as a private matter when fraud is involved, young lady. Have a pleasant evening." He offered his arm to Megan. She took it, leaning into his strength, and together they walked down the pathway. She didn't look back. Not once. She didn't look at the flower beds she had planted, the porch swing where she had read stories to her grandchildren, or the son who stood in the doorway, suddenly realizing that he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. The interior of the Cadillac smelled of peppermint, old paper, and rich leather. As Marcus pulled out of the driveway, the heavy tension that had been keeping Megan's spine rigidly straight finally gave way. She let out a long, shuddering breath, pressing her face against the cool glass of the passenger window. "Cry if you need to, May," Marcus said gently, keeping his eyes on the road. "There's no shame in it. Not here." "I don't have any tears left for that boy, Marcus," Megan whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I cried when his father died. I cried when he struggled with his business. But tonight I just feel empty." "Nature abhors a vacuum," Marcus replied calmly. "That emptiness will fill up with anger soon enough. And anger, when focused, is a very useful tool." They drove in silence through the sleeping city, heading downtown toward Marcus's private law practice. The building was an old brick townhouse nestled between modern glass high-rises, a stubborn holdout of history in a rapidly changing world. Marcus led her into his private office, a room lined from floor to ceiling with thick, leather-bound legal volumes. He poured her a cup of hot chamomile tea from a thermos on his desk, then sat down heavily in his leather executive chair, switching on a green glass banker's lamp. From the bottom drawer of his desk, Marcus pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy red wax, bearing the stamp of his law firm. He placed it carefully on the mahogany desk between them. "Before Robert passed," Marcus began, his voice dropping into its professional, measured cadence, "he sat right where you are sitting now. His heart was failing and he knew his time was short. We spent 3 hours drafting this." Megan frowned, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. "His will? We read the will, Marcus. He left the life insurance to me and the house to Jamal. He wanted Jamal to have the security he never had. That," Marcus said, tapping his finger on the desk, "is what Robert allowed Jamal to believe. And forgive me, May, it is what he allowed you to believe, to keep the peace." Megan's brow furrowed in deep confusion. "I don't understand." Marcus reached for a silver letter opener and sliced through the thick red wax of the envelope. He pulled out a stack of dense, watermarked legal documents. "Robert loved Jamal, but he was not a fool," Marcus explained, sliding the first document across the desk. "He knew Jamal was weak-willed. He knew that boy could be easily influenced by a pretty face or a bad business deal. If Robert had simply deeded the house to Jamal, it would have been an asset vulnerable to bankruptcy, creditors, or a manipulative spouse." Megan stared at the document. Across the top, in bold, stark lettering, read, "The Montgomery Family Irrevocable Living Trust." "Robert didn't leave the house to Jamal," Marcus said softly. "He placed the deed to the property into an irrevocable trust. And he named you, Megan, as the sole lifetime beneficiary. Jamal only has what is called a remainder interest, meaning he only truly owns the property after you pass away." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Megan set her tea down, her hands suddenly trembling. "But Jamal pays the property taxes. He pays the homeowner's insurance. We transferred the utility bills to his name. He thinks it's his house." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "Because as the trustee, he manages the upkeep, but he does not hold the deed. You hold the power of occupancy. Legally, Megan, they cannot evict you. You could have called the police tonight and had them removed for trespassing." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped Megan's lips. "Robert always was a protective man, even from the grave. But Marcus, why didn't you tell me? Why let me live like a guest in my own home?" "Because you wanted to help your son," Marcus said, a touch of sympathy in his eyes. "You wanted him to feel like the man of the house, the provider. If I had dropped a trust document on the table, it would have emasculated him. As long as you were safe and happy, I kept my promise to Robert to keep it quiet. But the situation has fundamentally changed." Megan shook her head, a heavy sadness settling over her. "So I have the house. I can go back and kick them out. Is that it? Is that the grand revenge?" Marcus's expression darkened. The warmth completely vanished from his face, replaced by the grim look of a prosecutor preparing to present a murder weapon to a jury. "No, Megan," Marcus said quietly. "That is not why I brought you here tonight. The trust is just the armor. What I am about to show you is the bullet." He reached into the envelope again and pulled out a separate folder, this one noticeably thinner. He opened it, revealing bank statements and a notarized contract with the logo of a major national bank. "When you called me an hour ago," Marcus said, "I immediately logged into the trust's financial portal. As the executor of Robert's estate, I have read-only access to monitor the property's equity. I wanted to make sure everything was secure before we planned your next move." He slid a bank statement across to her. He pointed a heavy finger at a line item highlighted in yellow. "Look at this, May." Megan put on her reading glasses. She traced the line with her finger. "Home equity line of credit. HELOC. Disbursement. $150,000. Her breath hitched. $150,000? What is this? A loan against the house?" "A massive one," Marcus confirmed grimly. "Taken out exactly 4 months ago." "But that's impossible," Megan argued, her mind racing. "You just said the house is in an irrevocable trust. Jamal can't take out a loan against a property he doesn't fully own without my explicit notarized signature. The bank would never allow it." "You are absolutely correct," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. The bank requires the primary beneficiary's signature to approve a HELOC on a trust property. He reached into the folder and pulled out the final piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a legal authorization form. At the bottom, on the line designated for the beneficiary, was a signature. Megan R. Montgomery. Megan stared at the ink. It looked like her handwriting. The loops, the slant. It was a nearly perfect forgery. But she knew with absolute terrifying certainty that she had never signed this paper. "They forged my name," she whispered, the horror of the betrayal washing over her like ice water. "Jamal, my own son forged my name to steal equity from his father's house." "Not Jamal," Marcus corrected sharply. Megan looked up. Marcus tapped the top corner of the document. "Look at the notary stamp. Look at the date." Megan squinted at the small, circular stamp. October 14th. Her memory snapped into focus with frightening clarity. October 14th. That was the day Chloe had insisted on taking her to a specialist for a routine wellness check. They had sat in a waiting room for 3 hours while Chloe kept disappearing to take business calls in the hallway. It was the exact same clinic where Dr. Evans, the doctor who had miraculously diagnosed her with dementia today, practiced. Jamal was in Chicago at a logistics conference on October 14th, Marcus said, piecing it together for her. He couldn't have been present at the bank to execute this, but Chloe had a general power of attorney document, supposedly signed by you, claiming you were physically unable to attend the closing due to declining cognitive health. She used that fake doctor's note to establish a narrative, forged your signature, and walked out of that bank with a cashier's check for $150,000. Megan felt the room spinning again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from pure, unadulterated rage. Chloe hadn't just been mean. She hadn't just been a shallow, disrespectful daughter-in-law. She was a calculating, cold-blooded criminal. She had orchestrated an elaborate, multi-layered scheme to steal a fortune, laying the groundwork for a fake dementia diagnosis to discredit Megan if she ever found out about the missing money. She was trying to lock Megan in a facility so there would be no one left of sound mind to question the missing equity. "Where is the money, Marcus?" Megan asked, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that even she didn't recognize. "Did it go to Jamal's business?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "The check was deposited into a secondary account. I've already retained a private investigator and a forensic accountant to trace every single penny. But one thing is clear. Your daughter-in-law has committed felony wire fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Those are federal crimes, Megan. Mandatory minimum sentencing." Megan took off her glasses. The exhaustion that had plagued her all evening evaporated, replaced by a burning, incandescent clarity. The woman who had allowed herself to be marginalized, silenced, and pushed into the background in the name of family peace was gone. In her place was a mother betrayed and a widow whose husband's legacy had been violated. "Marcus," Megan said, looking the formidable lawyer dead in the eye, "I want you to find out where my money went. I want you to find out every dirty little secret that woman is hiding. And when we have it all—" She paused, taking a sip of the chamomile tea. It tasted like ash, but she swallowed it anyway. "We are going to take everything from her. Every last dime, every ounce of her fake reputation. I want her completely destroyed." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "I thought you'd never ask," he murmured. "Let's go to war." For the next 10 days, Megan lived in the carriage house behind Marcus's historic downtown property. It was a beautiful, quiet space filled with antique mahogany furniture and the smell of old paper, but to Megan, it felt like a war room. She spent her mornings tending to Marcus's rose garden, channeling her restless energy into the dark, rich soil, pulling weeds with a ruthless precision. She needed to stay busy. If she stopped moving, the image of her grandchildren's faces, Maya's flower-dusted nose, Leo's proud little smile, would flood her mind, threatening to break the iron walls she had built around her heart. On the afternoon of the 11th day, Marcus called her into his main office. When Megan walked in, Marcus was not alone. Sitting in one of the leather guest chairs was a lean, unassuming man in his late 40s wearing a faded corduroy jacket. He had the kind of face that was entirely forgettable. The perfect asset for a man in his profession. "Megan, this is Silas," Marcus said, gesturing to the man. "Silas is the best private investigator in Georgia. I use him when I need to look under rocks that people have tried very hard to bury." Silas stood up and offered a respectful nod. Mrs. Montgomery, it's an honor. Marcus has told me a lot about your husband. Thank you, Silas, Megan said, taking a seat next to him, her back perfectly straight. What did you find beneath the rocks? Silas didn't smile. He opened a worn leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick manila folders, laying them methodically on Marcus's desk. I followed the money, just like Marcus asked, Silas began, his voice a low, even monotone. The $150,000 from the home equity line of credit that your daughter-in-law pulled out 4 months ago. I tracked the cashier's check. It didn't go anywhere near your son's logistics company. In fact, Jamal's business accounts show he's currently operating at a net loss of about $10,000 a month. He's essentially bankrupt, floating payroll on high-interest business credit cards. Megan closed her eyes for a brief second. Her son was drowning, just as he had said, but he was drowning while his wife stood on his shoulders to breathe. So where did my money go? Megan asked, her voice steady. Silas opened the first folder. It was filled with credit card statements and bank transfers. $62,000 went immediately to paying off 3 separate secret credit cards in Chloe's name. It looks like she had been maxing them out for the last 2 years. Designer clothes, luxury handbags, spa retreats, basically funding the influencer lifestyle she posts on her social media. She stole my equity to buy fake internet points, Megan stated, the absurdity of it tasting bitter on her tongue. Partially, Silas corrected, opening the second folder. But that leaves roughly $88,000 unaccounted for. That money went into a newly opened LLC, registered to a P.O. box. The LLC's only asset is a 1-year prepaid lease on a luxury studio apartment in Midtown. $5,000 a month, plus a hefty security deposit and premium furnishings. Marcus leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. A studio apartment? Why would she need a studio apartment when she lives in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs? Silas finally looked up, his eyes meeting Megan's with a flicker of genuine pity. Because she doesn't use it for herself, Marcus. She uses it for him. Silas opened the third and final folder. He slid a stack of 8x10 glossy photographs across the desk. Megan looked down. The world went completely silent. The photos were taken from various angles, some from across the street, some from a coffee shop window. They showed Chloe. She wasn't wearing her carefully curated beige loungewear. She was wearing tight workout clothes, laughing freely. And her arms were wrapped tightly around the neck of a young, heavily muscled man with a faded buzz cut and sleeve tattoos. In several photos, they were kissing passionately in the lobby of the Midtown apartment building. In another, he was carrying her shopping bags as they walked into the elevator. His name is Ethan, Silas explained quietly. 24 years old. He's a personal trainer at a high-end gym downtown. According to my sources, he doesn't actually have any clients. He doesn't need to. Your daughter-in-law pays his rent, buys his groceries, and keeps him on a very generous monthly allowance. They've been seeing each other for at least 1.5 years. Megan stared at the photographs until the edges of the images began to blur. She had expected greed. She had expected selfishness. But the sheer, calculated depravity of it took her breath away. Chloe had looked her son in the eye every night, kissed him, and demanded more money for home renovations, all while funneling his inheritance into an apartment to sleep with a boy 10 years her junior. She had framed Megan as a dementia patient to get her out of the house, simply to secure the rest of the equity without interference. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. "Does Jamal know?" Megan whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Silas replied firmly. "I pulled his phone records and monitored his routine. Your son goes to the warehouse at 5 a.m., works until 8 p.m., goes home, and repeats. He has no idea. He thinks he's failing his wife by not providing enough." Marcus let out a heavy, dark breath. "Felony fraud, forgery, and now marital dissipation of assets. In a divorce proceeding, a judge will crucify her. We can take this straight to the police, Megan. We have the paper trail. We can have her arrested by Friday." Megan looked at the photograph of Chloe and the trainer. Then she looked out the window of the office. She thought of Jamal's hollowed-out eyes, his slumped shoulders. He was a coward, yes. He had betrayed his mother, yes. But he was also a victim, trapped in a web of manipulation so thick he couldn't see the sky. If she sent the police to the house, Jamal would be blindsided. The shock could destroy him utterly. He was still her son. The maternal instinct, battered and bruised as it was, gave one final desperate pulse. "No," Megan said, her voice hardening into steel. Not the police, not yet. Megan, you can't be serious, Marcus frowned. This woman is dangerous. I am serious, Marcus, she replied, standing up. She gathered the photos and the financial statements, sliding them back into the folders. Jamal is living in an illusion. If I just blow it up from the outside, Chloe will spin it. She'll tell him the police are making a mistake or that I set her up. He is so brainwashed he might actually believe her. So what do you want to do? Marcus asked. I need to show him, Megan said. I need to look my son in the eye and show him exactly what he traded his mother for. He has to choose to see the truth. I owe him that one last chance. After that, whatever happens is on him. 2 days later, at 8:30 p.m., Megan sat in a booth at the back of Eddie's, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district. It was a place heavy with the smell of old grease, strong coffee, and nostalgia. When Jamal was a teenager, Robert used to bring him here after high school football games to eat cherry pie and talk about becoming a man. Megan wore a simple navy blue dress. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture immaculate. She had asked Marcus to call Jamal from an untraceable burner phone to arrange the meeting, framing it as an urgent discussion about the deed to the house. She knew Jamal would come. He was desperate. The bell above the diner door chimed. Jamal walked in. If it were possible, he looked even worse than he had the night Megan left. He was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. He scanned the diner, spotted Megan, and walked over, his jaw set in a tight defensive line. He didn't say hello. He slid into the vinyl booth across from her and crossed his arms. Mr. Hughes said I needed to be here, Jamal said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Where is he? Marcus isn't coming, Jamal. It's just us, Megan said softly. Jamal scoffed, looking away. So this is a trap. Look, Mom. If you're trying to guilt-trip me into coming back to the house, it's not going to work. Chloe is already looking into full-time care facilities for you. We can do this the easy way, or we can get lawyers involved and do it the hard way. Megan felt a sharp pain in her chest, but she didn't flinch. I already have a lawyer, Jamal, and we aren't here to talk about facilities. We are here to talk about your wife. Jamal rolled his eyes, a bitter, exhausted sound escaping his lips. God, not this again. You've always hated her. Ever since the day I brought her home, you looked down on her. Just because she doesn't want to spend her life scrubbing floors and cooking greens doesn't make her a bad person. Jamal, Megan interrupted, keeping her voice incredibly calm. I need you to listen to me. Your business is failing. You are drowning in debt. And I know why. Jamal froze. His defensive posture cracked for a split second, revealing the sheer terror underneath. How do you know about my business? Megan reached into her leather handbag. She pulled out the manila envelope Silas had prepared. She placed it gently on the formica table between the salt and pepper shakers. 4 months ago, Megan said, her voice steady and precise, Chloe went to the bank. She used a forged power of attorney and a fake medical diagnosis to take out a $150,000 line of credit against the house. My house. Jamal stared at the envelope. He blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the words. That's insane. The house is in my name, and she wouldn't do that. She told me she was looking into getting a loan to help the business. Open the envelope, Jamal. With trembling hands, Jamal reached across the table. He pulled the flap open. The first things he saw were the financial spreadsheets. Silas had highlighted the flow of money in bright neon yellow. Jamal's eyes darted across the pages, reading the credit card payoffs, the LLC registration, the $5,000 monthly rent transfers. What is this? Jamal whispered, the air leaving his lungs. A studio apartment? Why is she paying rent on an apartment in Midtown? Megan didn't answer. She just waited. Jamal flipped to the next section of the file, the photographs. Megan watched his face as he saw the first picture. It was as if someone had physically struck him with a baseball bat. His mouth fell open. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He quickly flipped to the next photo. And the next. Chloe kissing the trainer. Chloe holding hands with him. Chloe laughing, wearing the diamond earrings Jamal had bought her for their anniversary. For a full minute, there was no sound at the table, except the faint, tinny music playing from the diner's kitchen. Jamal's breathing became erratic. His hands shook violently, dropping the photos onto the table. He stared at the images of his wife, the woman he was currently destroying his own mother to protect. The cognitive dissonance in his brain was reaching a breaking point. To accept these photos meant accepting that his entire life, his sacrifices, his cruelty toward his mother, all of it had been for a lie. It meant accepting that he was a monumental fool. The human mind, when faced with an ego-destroying reality, often chooses delusion. Jamal violently shoved the photos back across the table. They scattered onto the floor. "These are fake," Jamal hissed, his voice trembling with a sudden manic rage. Megan blinked, taken aback. "Jamal, what are you saying? Look at the bank statements. Look at the dates." "I said they are fake!" Jamal slammed his fist on the table, rattling the coffee cups. A few patrons turned to look, but he didn't care. "You hired someone to make these, didn't you? Some Photoshop garbage? You are so obsessed with ruining my marriage that you would sink this low?" "Jamal, stop this," Megan pleaded, her heart breaking all over again. "You know it's true. Deep down, you know. Look at how much money is missing." "No!" Jamal pointed a shaking finger at her, his eyes wild, desperate, and cruel. "Chloe was right about you. You are sick, Mom. Your mind is going. You're so paranoid and jealous of her youth and our life that you're fabricating delusions." Megan sat frozen. The words hit her like physical blows. "Your mind is going. You are sick." He was using the lie. Even when presented with absolute, undeniable proof of his wife's betrayal, Jamal chose to weaponize Chloe's fake dementia diagnosis against his own mother, just to protect his fragile ego. He would rather call his mother crazy than admit his wife was a whore and a thief. "You went into my father's house," Jamal spat, his voice dripping with venom, "and you tried to tear my family apart. Chloe is the mother of my children. She has stood by me while my business is struggling. And you do this? You're a bitter, lonely old woman." Jamal stood up, grabbing his coat. He looked down at Megan with absolute disgust. "Don't ever contact me again," Jamal said coldly. "If you come near my house, or my kids, I will have the police arrest you for trespassing. And I will make sure the court locks you away in a psychiatric ward where you belong." He turned and walked out of the diner, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. Megan sat alone in the booth. She looked down at the photographs scattered on the linoleum floor. For the first time since this nightmare began, a tear slipped down Megan's cheek. But it was not a tear of sorrow. It was the physical manifestation of a bond breaking. The umbilical cord, stretched thin by years of disrespect and manipulation, had just been violently severed. She reached down, calmly picked up the photographs, and placed them back into the envelope. The woman who had walked into the diner was a mother, hoping desperately to save her lost son from a burning building. The woman who walked out of the diner was a widow, a survivor, and a force of nature. Jamal had made his choice. He had chosen the burning building, and Megan was no longer going to risk her life to drag him out. She pulled her burner phone from her purse and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious. Megan looked out the window of the diner, watching Jamal's car speed away into the night. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, stripped of all emotion, cold as absolute zero. "File the police report, Marcus," Megan said. "Release the financial records to the fraud department. I want the federal indictments drafted by tomorrow morning." "Are you sure, May?" Marcus asked softly. "Once we pull this trigger, Jamal goes down with the ship. The scandal will ruin his company entirely. He will lose everything." "I don't have a son anymore, Marcus," Megan replied, stepping out into the cool night air. "Burn it all to the ground." The morning after the diner meeting, the air in Atlanta was thick with the suffocating humidity of an impending thunderstorm. Megan stood in the small kitchen of Marcus's carriage house, methodically pouring boiling water over loose-leaf Earl Grey tea. Her movements were precise, automated. She had not slept a single minute. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jamal's face contorted in rage, heard his voice calling her a bitter, lonely old woman. She had made her decision. The federal indictments were being drafted, but the heavy, metallic taste of grief still coated the back of her throat. A sharp, authoritative knock at the heavy wooden door broke the silence. Megan frowned, glancing at the wall clock. It was barely 7:30 a.m. Marcus usually didn't come out to the carriage house until after 8. She wiped her hands on a linen towel and opened the door. Standing on the porch were 2 uniformed deputies from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. "Megan Montgomery?" the older deputy asked, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. His expression was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Yes, I am Megan," she replied, her heart giving a sudden erratic flutter, though her face remained impassive. "Is there a problem, officers?" The deputy held out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a blue cover sheet. "Ma'am, you are being served with an ex parte temporary protective order. You need to take these. I also need to verbally inform you that as of this moment, you are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Chloe Montgomery, Jamal Montgomery, Maya Montgomery, or Leo Montgomery." The words hit Megan with the blunt force of a physical blow. The breath was knocked completely out of her lungs. Maya. Leo. "What?" Megan whispered, her hands trembling as she reflexively took the heavy stack of papers. "Protective order? For what? I haven't been anywhere near them." "The details are in the affidavit, ma'am," the younger deputy said, his tone slightly softer but still firm. "You are not to call, text, email, or use any third party to contact the petitioners. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately and held without bail. Do you understand?" "This is a mistake," Megan said, her voice rising in panic, the stoic armor finally cracking. "I am their grandmother. I practically raised those children. You can't tell me I can't see my grandchildren." "Ma'am, do you understand the order?" the older deputy repeated, stepping forward, his posture hardening. "Yes," a deep, booming voice answered from behind the deputies. Marcus strode up the cobblestone path, his mahogany cane clicking sharply against the stones. He was already dressed in his courtroom suit, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, contained fury. He stepped smoothly between the deputies and Megan. "My client understands the stipulations of the temporary order, officers," Marcus said smoothly, taking the papers from Megan's shaking hands. "We will address these baseless allegations at the hearing. Thank you for your service." The deputies exchanged a look, nodded curtly, and walked back to their cruiser. Once the police car pulled away, Megan's knees buckled. Marcus caught her by the elbow, supporting her weight, and guided her back into the carriage house, sitting her down at the small oak dining table. "Marcus, what is this?" Megan gasped, tears finally spilling over her lashes, hot and fast. "What did she do?" Marcus flipped through the blue-backed documents, his eyes scanning the legal jargon with lightning speed. As he read, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. "It's Chloe," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Jamal must have gone straight home from the diner and told her everything you showed him. He told her you had the bank statements and the photos of her and the trainer." "So she panicked?" "Worse, she strategized," Marcus said, laying the affidavit on the table. "She knew that if you took those documents to the authorities, she was finished. So she launched a preemptive strike to destroy your credibility before you could file the charges." Marcus pointed to the sworn statement in the document. "She went to the police late last night. She claimed that you broke into the house in the middle of a severe dementia-induced psychotic episode. She stated that you were hallucinating, screaming that she was a thief, and that you physically attacked her, scratching her face and threatening to take the children away." Megan felt a sickening wave of nausea wash over her. "She hurt herself. She actually scratched her own face to frame me." "And she used Jamal as a corroborating witness," Marcus added grimly. "He swore on an affidavit that your mental health has been deteriorating for months and that you are a physical danger to the children. Because of the emergency nature of the claim and the involvement of minors, the judge rubber-stamped the temporary restraining order until a formal hearing can be held." Megan covered her mouth with her hands, a jagged sob tearing from her throat. The loss of her house, the loss of her money, even the betrayal of her son. All of it paled in comparison to this. Chloe had weaponized the justice system to sever Megan from the only pure, beautiful things left in her life. She pictured Maya waiting for her to come bake biscuits. She pictured Leo holding up his drawing of the purple space dog. She was barred from holding them, barred from comforting them. Chloe had painted her as a monster in the eyes of the law. "She wins," Megan wept, her spirit fracturing under the weight of the cruelty. "If I take her to court for the fraud, her lawyer will just wave this restraining order in the air. They'll say I fabricated the bank records because I'm a crazy, vindictive woman who attacks her own family." Marcus pulled up a chair and sat directly in front of her. He reached out and wrapped his large, warm hands around her trembling ones. "Look at me, May," Marcus commanded softly. Megan lifted her tear-streaked face. "She hasn't won," Marcus said, his eyes burning with an absolute, unwavering certainty. "She just made the biggest mistake of her life. When you corner a rat, it bites. But Chloe isn't a master strategist. She's a desperate amateur playing a very dangerous game. She just escalated this from civil fraud to perjury and filing a false police report." Megan sniffled, trying to draw strength from his conviction. "But how do we prove it? Jamal will lie for her. He's terrified of her." "Jamal is a lost cause," Marcus agreed. "But Chloe has a weak link. A very arrogant, very greedy weak link who doesn't have the stomach for federal prison." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Silas, we have a change of plans. I need you to go see the boy. Yes, the trainer. Today. And Silas, put the fear of God into him." At 2 p.m. that afternoon, Ethan Carter was wrapping up a workout session at the elite Midtown Fitness Club. In reality, he had spent the last hour spotting a wealthy client while staring at his own reflection in the mirror, admiring the pump in his biceps. Ethan was 24, aggressively handsome, and entirely fueled by vanity. He lived in a bubble of protein shakes, club VIP sections, and the comfortable allowance provided by his sugar mama, Chloe. He walked out the back exit of the gym, a towel draped over his neck, heading toward his leased Audi. "Ethan Carter," a flat, monotone voice called out from the shadows of the parking garage. Ethan stopped. A thoroughly unremarkable man in a faded corduroy jacket stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was Silas. "Who's asking?" Ethan replied, puffing out his chest instinctively, trying to physically intimidate the smaller man. Silas didn't blink. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder, tossing it casually onto the hood of Ethan's pristine Audi. It landed with a heavy thwack. "I'm the guy who knows exactly how your rent gets paid," Silas said smoothly. "I'm also the guy who is deciding whether or not to include your name on the federal indictments being filed tomorrow morning." Ethan's cocky smirk faltered. He looked at the folder, then back at Silas. "I don't know what you're talking about, man." "You got the wrong guy. Get off my car." "The studio apartment on 14th Street. Silas recited, his voice a relentless rhythmic drone. $5,000 a month, leased through an LLC, paid for by Chloe Montgomery, the same Chloe Montgomery whose husband is currently going bankrupt, which means the money paying for your bed, your car, and your protein powder isn't hers. It's stolen." Ethan swallowed hard. The bravado began to leak out of him. "Look, whatever she does for money isn't my business. We just hang out. That doesn't make me a criminal." Silas let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Ethan, you really should read the penal code before you let married women buy you things. It's called conspiracy to commit wire fraud and receipt of stolen property. You are the beneficiary of funds secured through the forged signature of a senior citizen. The federal prosecutors won't see you as a toy boy. They will see you as a co-conspirator in an elder abuse financial scheme. Silas took a step closer. The air in the parking garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Do you know what federal prison does to pretty boys who steal from grandmothers?" Silas whispered. "It's not a country club, Ethan, and your girlfriend isn't going to save you. In fact, right now, she's busy filing fake police reports to cover her tracks. When the feds kick her door in, who do you think she's going to blame? The husband she controls, or the disposable boy toy she keeps on the side?" Ethan's tan face turned the color of old oatmeal. His eyes darted around the empty parking garage like a trapped animal. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just a guy who liked easy money and didn't ask questions. The reality of 20 years in a federal penitentiary crashed down on him with crushing weight. Wait, Ethan stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "I didn't steal anything. She told me she had family money. She told me her husband was a loser and his mom was some rich, crazy old bat who didn't know what day it was." "Ignorance of the source of funds is not a legal defense," Silas stated coldly. "Unless you have something that proves she orchestrated the theft alone, you are going down with her. I have the FBI fraud division on speed dial. Give me one good reason not to press send." Ethan's breathing turned ragged. He leaned against his car, his mind scrambling. If I give you something, will you leave me out of it? Total immunity? I don't grant immunity. But if you provide actionable evidence that secures Chloe's conviction, my client will ensure your name is left out of the civil suit, and we will not forward your involvement to the federal prosecutor." Silas tapped his watch. "You have 30 seconds. Okay, Jesus," Ethan panicked. He reached into his gym bag and pulled out his iPhone, his fingers shaking so badly he struggled to unlock it. "She likes to brag," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "When we drink, she likes to brag about how smart she is. A couple of months ago, she got super drunk in the apartment. She was laughing about how she got the loan. I thought she was just making up stories to sound like a boss, so I took a voice memo of it to mess with her later. I forgot I even had it." Ethan opened his audio files, scrolled down, and hit play. The sound of clinking glasses echoed from the phone's speaker, followed by Chloe's unmistakable shrill laughter. "I'm telling you, Ethan, it was too easy." Chloe's voice slurred out of the phone, dripping with arrogance. "The old bat practically signed her life away. Well, not exactly. I had her practice her signature on some medical release forms for a week. By the time I took the power of attorney to the bank, I could write Megan Montgomery better than she could." Ethan's voice could be heard in the background. "Babe, isn't Jamal going to notice $150,000 missing from the house?" Chloe snorted loudly. Jamal is an idiot. He's so stressed about his pathetic little warehouse that he doesn't even look at the mail anymore. I intercept all the bank statements. As long as I keep telling him he's the man of the house, he'll believe anything. I could sell his kidney while he was sleeping and he'd thank me for it." Silas listened to the recording, his face an unreadable mask, but internally he knew Marcus was going to smile for a week. It was the Holy Grail, a recorded confession, freely given, detailing the forgery, the intent, and the manipulation. Silas reached out and plucked the phone from Ethan's sweaty hand. "Hey, wait, you can just airdrop it," Ethan protested weakly. "This is evidence now," Silas said, dropping the phone into an evidence bag he pulled from his pocket. "Buy a new one." Silas turned and began to walk away into the shadows of the garage. "Hey," Ethan called out, his voice cracking. "Are we good? You promised you'd leave me out of it." Silas paused and looked back over his shoulder. "We're good, Ethan, but a word of advice? Pack your bags. Because when Chloe finds out you gave her up, she's going to burn your world down, assuming the feds don't get to her first." An hour later, Silas walked into the carriage house. Megan was sitting in the armchair, holding a framed photograph of Maya and Leo, her eyes red and exhausted. Marcus was pacing the floor, on a call with a private judge he knew, trying to expedite the restraining order hearing. Silas walked over to the coffee table, placed the sealed evidence bag containing Ethan's phone down, and looked at Megan. "Mrs. Montgomery," Silas said, allowing a rare, faint smile to touch his lips. "I believe we have everything we need to end this." Marcus hung up his phone and walked over, his eyes gleaming as Silas played the audio file. As Megan listened to Chloe's drunken, boastful confession, listening to the woman laugh about forging her name and treating her son like a foolish puppet, the sadness that had paralyzed her all morning evaporated. It burned away, leaving behind a cold, indestructible diamond of resolve. Chloe had tried to play God. She had tried to steal Megan's legacy, humiliate her son, and sever her from her grandchildren. But she had made the fatal mistake of leaving a weapon in the hands of a coward. Megan stood up. She smoothed the skirt of her dress, her posture perfectly aligned, the matriarch restored to her full, terrifying glory. "Marcus," Megan said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a church bell, "set up a mediation meeting at your office for tomorrow afternoon. Tell Jamal it is his final chance to settle the deed dispute out of court before the restraining order hearing." "And if Chloe refuses to come?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. "Tell them," Megan replied, her eyes narrowing into cold slits, "that if they both attend, I am prepared to sign a quitclaim deed, surrendering all my rights to the house to them forever." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "The ultimate bait." "Exactly," Megan said. "Bring her to me. I want to look her in the eye when I take her life apart piece by piece." The conference room in Marcus Hughes's law firm was designed to intimidate. Paneled in dark, rich mahogany and lined with legal volumes that smelled of aged leather and binding glue, it felt less like a meeting space and more like a tribunal. A massive oak table dominated the center of the room. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the thunderstorm finally breaking over Atlanta, casting brief, dramatic flashes of lightning across the polished surfaces. Megan sat at the head of the table. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, a strand of real pearls around her neck, and an expression of absolute, terrifying serenity. She did not look like a woman who had been kicked out of her home, nor did she look like the demented victim described in a fraudulent police report. She looked like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. To her right sat Marcus, his hands resting calmly on the handle of his cane. To her left sat Silas, the private investigator, and Paul, a forensic accountant in a crisp white shirt, a thick ledger open in front of him. At exactly 2 p.m., the heavy double doors opened. Jamal walked in first. He looked completely hollowed out. The bags under his eyes were dark purple, his posture slumped under the invisible weight of his failing business and the agonizing tension of the past 2 weeks. Behind him walked Chloe. The contrast was staggering. Chloe looked triumphant. She wore a pristine white designer trench coat, her hair blown out to perfection, holding a crocodile skin handbag that Megan knew was purchased with stolen equity. Chloe's eyes danced with a barely concealed arrogance. In her mind, she had won. She had successfully weaponized the law against her mother-in-law, and now the crazy old bat was surrendering the deed to the house just to make the restraining order go away. "Let's make this quick, Marcus," Chloe said, not even looking at Megan. She pulled out a chair and sat down, crossing her legs. "We have a contractor meeting at 4 o'clock to finalize the master suite renovations. Where is the quitclaim deed?" Jamal sat down next to her, staring at the table. "Mom," he muttered, his voice thick with a mixture of shame and exhaustion. "I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about this." Megan didn't flinch. She simply looked at her son. A long, heavy silence stretched across the room, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass. "There is no quitclaim deed, Jamal," Megan said, her voice smooth and cold as polished marble. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? The only reason we are sitting in the same room as you, which violates my protective order, by the way, is because your lawyer promised you were signing over the house. If this is a trick, I am calling the police right now and having you arrested." Chloe reached into her purse for her phone. "You can call them if you like, Mrs. Montgomery," Marcus intervened, his baritone voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "In fact, it might save us some time. There are 2 federal agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division having coffee in the lobby downstairs. Silas, would you mind waving them up?" Chloe's hand froze inside her purse. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden sharp flicker of uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" "We are here for a mediation," Megan stated, "but not about the deed to my house. We are here to discuss the $150,000 you stole from it and the federal prison sentence you are currently facing." "This is ridiculous," Chloe scoffed, turning to Jamal. "Babe, she's having another episode. Let's go. She's completely lost her mind." Jamal began to stand up, looking pleadingly at his mother. "Mom, please, stop this. We don't want to hurt you, but you need psychiatric help." "Sit down, Jamal," Marcus commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order forged in decades of authority. Jamal instinctively sat back down. Marcus gestured to the accountant. "Paul, if you would." Paul adjusted his glasses and turned a stack of highlighted documents toward Jamal and Chloe. "Mr. Montgomery, my name is Paul Arrington. I am a certified forensic accountant. Over the last 4 days, I have audited your personal, business, and trust accounts. 4 months ago, a home equity line of credit was opened against the trust property. The signature on the authorization form belongs to your mother. However, the notary stamp matches the exact date and time your mother was across town at a medical clinic, an appointment arranged and attended by your wife." Jamal frowned, shaking his head. No, Chloe told me she was getting a loan for the logistics company. She wouldn't—" "The funds never touched your company," Paul interrupted smoothly. He slid a flowchart across the table. $62,000 were immediately diverted to pay off 3 hidden credit cards in your wife's name. The remainder was wired to a Shell LLC to prepay a 1-year lease on a luxury apartment in Midtown. Jamal stared at the paper, the same paper his mother had tried to show him in the diner, the paper he had called a fake. He looked at Chloe. Her face had lost all its color. The pristine white trench coat suddenly seemed to swallow her whole. "Chloe?" Jamal whispered, his voice cracking. "What is he talking about? What apartment?" "They're lying!" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical octave. "They fabricated all of this. Your mother hates me. She printed fake bank statements to ruin our marriage. Jamal, don't look at that garbage." She reached out and tried to swipe the papers off the table, but Silas caught her wrist. His grip was entirely gentle, but as immovable as iron. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am," Silas murmured, releasing her arm. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He placed it carefully in the center of the oak table. "Mrs. Montgomery," Silas said, looking dead into Chloe's eyes, "I had a very illuminating conversation with Ethan Carter yesterday afternoon in the parking garage of his gym." At the sound of Ethan's name, Chloe physically recoiled as if she had been struck. Her breath hitched, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. "Who is Ethan?" Jamal demanded, his voice rising, the confusion finally giving way to a sickening dread. Silas didn't answer Jamal. He simply pressed play. The audio filled the quiet conference room. First, the sound of clinking glasses. Then Chloe's voice, slurred and dripping with malicious arrogance. "I'm telling you, Ethan, it was too easy. The old bat practically signed her life away. Well, not exactly. By the time I took the power of attorney to the bank, I could write Megan Montgomery better than she could." Jamal's mouth fell open. He stopped breathing. Ethan's voice echoed next. "Babe, isn't Jamal going to notice $150,000 missing from the house?" Then came the laugh. The cruel, mocking laugh that Chloe had perfected. Jamal is an idiot. He's so stressed about his pathetic little warehouse that he doesn't even look at the mail anymore. As long as I keep telling him he's the man of the house, he'll believe anything. I could sell his kidney while he was sleeping and he'd thank me for it." Silas reached out and pressed stop. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It was the sound of a man's entire reality being detonated from the inside out. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at his wife, the woman he had loved, the woman he had defended, the woman he had thrown his own mother out into the street for. Chloe was hyperventilating. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking violently. She reached out toward Jamal, tears of panic finally streaming down her face. Babe, please, that's out of context. I was drunk. He manipulated me. It's an AI voice. It's a deep fake, I swear." "Don't touch me," Jamal whispered. His voice wasn't angry. It was dead. Completely and utterly dead. He looked at her as if she were a rotting corpse sitting in the chair next to him. "You called my mother an old bat. You forged her name. You let me believe she was losing her mind." Jamal buried his face in his hands, a jagged, agonizing sob tearing from his throat. The realization of what he had done, the cruelty he had inflicted on the woman who had given him life, all for a woman who viewed him as a pathetic ATM, crushed the breath out of him. He wept openly, the sound echoing miserably against the mahogany walls. Megan watched her son break. Her heart ached with a mother's instinct to comfort him, but she forced herself to stay seated. Jamal needed to feel the absolute bottom of this pain. It was the only way he would ever rebuild a spine. Megan turned her gaze to Chloe. "You played a very dangerous game, Chloe," Megan said softly, her voice cutting through Jamal's sobbing. "You tried to take my home. You tried to steal my money. But your fatal mistake was trying to take my grandchildren away from me with that fraudulent restraining order." Megan leaned forward, interlacing her fingers on the table. "Here is what is going to happen," Megan stated, delivering the ultimatum with the precision of a surgeon. "Marcus has drafted 3 documents. The first is a full written confession to the forgery and the financial fraud. The second is an uncontested divorce decree, waiving your right to any alimony, any portion of the business, and any marital assets. The third is a custody agreement granting Jamal primary physical and legal custody of Maya and Leo." Chloe stared at the documents Marcus slid across the table, her jaw trembling. "I will not give up my kids. You can't make me do that. I'll fight you in court." "If you fight me," Megan replied, her eyes devoid of any mercy, "Silas walks downstairs, hands this tape to the FBI, and you are arrested for felony wire fraud, identity theft, and perjury. You will go to federal prison for no less than 10 years. You will lose the children anyway, but you will also lose your freedom, your fake social media life, and whatever remains of your youth." Megan pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger at the pen resting on the table. "Sign the papers, Chloe. Pack your designer bags, leave the keys on the table, and walk out of our lives forever. Or leave in handcuffs. I truly do not care which one you choose." Chloe looked frantically at Marcus, at Silas, and finally at Jamal. But Jamal wouldn't look at her. He was staring at the wall, dead to her existence. There was no one left to manipulate. The facade had completely collapsed. With shaking hands and tears ruining her expensive makeup, Chloe picked up the pen. She signed her name on every line. When she was finished, she stood up, grabbed her crocodile handbag, and ran out of the conference room without looking back. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, finalizing her erasure from the Montgomery family. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rain against the window and Jamal's quiet, broken weeping. Megan stood up. She walked around the large oak table and stood behind her son. She placed her warm, steady hands on his trembling shoulders. Jamal let out a fresh wave of tears, turning and wrapping his arms around his mother's waist, burying his face in her suit jacket just as he had done when he was a little boy who had scraped his knee. "I'm sorry," Jamal sobbed, the words muffled. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I was so blind, I was so weak. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Megan gently stroked the back of his head. "No, Jamal. Right now you don't. You broke my heart, and you betrayed your father's legacy. It will take a long time to earn my trust back." She gently pulled him back so she could look him in the eyes. "But you are my son. I can be angry. I can be disappointed. But I will never abandon you. Now wipe your face. We have a lot of work to do." 6 months later, the scent of baked macaroni and cheese, deeply savory with sharp cheddar and a hint of smoked paprika, drifted through the kitchen. The autumn sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm golden glow over the oak cabinets and the floral curtains. Megan stood at the counter, her hands dusted with flour, humming an old gospel tune. "Grandma, look!" Leo ran into the kitchen, wearing a slightly oversized apron, holding up a lumpy but enthusiastic attempt at shaping a biscuit. Maya was right behind him, carefully carrying a tray of perfectly round ones she had cut out herself. "Lord have mercy, those are the finest biscuits I've seen all year." Megan laughed, her face radiant with genuine joy. The front door clicked open. Jamal walked in. He looked different. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a pair of sturdy denim jeans and a simple flannel shirt. He had closed the failing logistics company to avoid total bankruptcy and had taken a job as a regional manager for a local shipping depot. The pay was a fraction of what he used to make, and he was working long hours, but the dark circles under his eyes had faded. There was a quiet humility to him now, a grounded strength that he had lacked before. The intensive weekly therapy sessions were working. He was learning how to be a father, how to establish boundaries, and most importantly, how to be a man his father would have respected. "Hey, Mama," Jamal smiled, walking over and kissing her cheek. He smelled like crisp autumn air and hard work. "Smells amazing." "Wash your hands, Jamal. You're just in time to help Maya with the glaze," Megan instructed warmly. As Jamal rolled up his sleeves and stood next to his daughter at the marble island, Megan took a step back, leaning against the doorway, watching them. Chloe was gone. The Midtown apartment had been liquidated to pay off her debts, and the last Jamal had heard, she had moved to another state, trying to restart her influencer life from scratch. The nightmare was over. Megan looked down at her hands. They were calloused from decades of nursing, wrinkled from age and dusted with flour. They were the hands of a woman who had built a life, lost it, and fought a war to get it back. She remembered a conversation she had with Marcus on the balcony of his carriage house, just days after the mediation. He had told her that she was the strongest woman he knew. She had told him that women like her didn't have the luxury of breaking. When life shattered them, they didn't sweep away the pieces. They gathered them up, put them under unimaginable pressure, and forged themselves into something new. They became diamonds. And diamonds, no matter how hard you strike them, do not break. They only shine. Megan smiled, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked back into the kitchen to join her family. The house was safe. The trust was restored. And the Montgomery legacy was finally whole again.